talking too much about podcasting. I think we all have an idea what podcasting is, and if we don't, we'll find out from Brent today. So,
hello everybody. I'm glad you can make it here today. This presentation has to do with podcasting. The future is now.
We're going to specifically be looking at how instructors around the country have been utilizing podcasts. Right? So this presentation really isn't going to be focusing on how-to or the different techniques to do it. There is a Apple seminar on podcasting that's later on today that I believe will be addressing more of the how-to issues. This is dealing more with how instructors are using it, some of the things to consider, some of the possibilities. We're dealing with possibilities, not limitations. So, all right, let's keep going. So we're going to be going over these different things. I'm going to quickly go over podcasting, what it is, RSS feeds. Some of you might not be familiar with some of that jargon. We'll be talking about that a little bit, how it's actually been used by different instructors in different parts of the United States, some possibilities and what the future might hold for podcasts, as well as any questions you might have. Okay, so first, what is podcasting? Well, podcasting specifically talks about a multimedia file. It could be audio, it could be video, it could be text. There's enhanced podcast that deals with putting in images, right? But the thing is that it's over the internet using a syndication feed for playback on mobile devices and personal computers. Okay, that's the key part to understand, is that you're setting this up so that it could be played on mobile devices or personal computers. Note that I didn't say the word iPod. Okay, it's kind of a misnomer to say podcasting. That's the term, that's the accepted phrase that's used, but it has nothing to do with iPod. It got that term. It's a mixture of saying iPod and broadcasting, although none of those two things are actually what's going on here, because you don't have to have an iPod and you're not technically broadcasting it. It's something different. You're sending it specifically in a syndication form. Okay, so what do I mean when I say syndication? Here we're talking about having an RSS feed. These are three of the different symbols that you'll see a lot. If you see those symbols or one of those symbols on a website, it's talking about you click on this and you'll get the feed for the podcast. So here again, we're talking about something that is kind of convoluted, or some people might not understand this part. You have to have an RSS feed in order to truly have a podcast. And what that does is, let's say you're an instructor and you have all these different lectures that you're going to have for your podcast. So what I do is I subscribe to your RSS feed, and now I automatically get those episodes sent to me. Automatically. It's downloaded for me. Whenever I log on to my computer, it's downloaded. And then whenever I sync up my mobile device, iPod or something else, then it's automatically sent into it. That's the whole coolness of the podcast, is that everything is automatic. It's just done for you. So if you don't have that RSS feed, then it's not truly a podcast. It's just content for a mobile device or for your computer. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'll address some of the issues with that, as far as right now, if you use K-State Online, Axio, you could create all of this content for a mobile device and then house it within K-State Online. Now, you aren't truly going to have a podcast because the person can't subscribe to your RSS feed and have it downloaded automatically. Now, you could easily tell your students, okay, you need to download this content and then view it on your mobile device or personal computer, whatever you want to do. It's just one extra step. The reason for that deals with security issues. So I'll give you a brief example here. So here's a test course. I just made this up, right? So if I'm putting my content there, the RSS feed won't be able to get it because it's behind this password protected area, right? So K-State Online is addressing that issue. We're looking into several different things because we have a very high secure area. K-State Online is very secure, and what you do with that RSS feed is it's trying to get in there, but we don't allow it because it's sort of a third party trying to get in there. So we're trying to build sort of a secondary area that would house your podcast and allow for this RSS security to go through. It's a whole different type of security. And there's also a separate security that iTunes uses specifically, so we want to make it compatible with that too. Now there's a couple of different programs going on. There's something going on with Apple in that they would house all of your content, so it would basically allow for the RSS feed to go into there, and it would be password protected. The only problem there is that, well, everything would be housed by Apple. It wouldn't be housed within K-State Online. So for the time being, what you would simply do is, in your course, you would put in the content that you want, and you would set it up so that it could be downloaded. That's a new feature in K-State Online now, is that media files can be either streamed or downloaded based off of what you want. So you'd set that up just like that, and then the student would just manually download it, and then they would move it onto their iPod or mobile device, anything like that. As an example, I'm going to send this around. This is an iPod, and what this is showing you, there's a couple different examples here, but all I did is I pretended like I'm an instructor, and I had a guest lecturer, let's say. All right? The video here is basically just one of the roundtables from previous semester, and I just took that video and I encoded it for the iPod, right? So when you go through and watch this, you'll see it looks really clear, it looks really nice, but you have to remember that the content was made not specifically for the iPod. The content was made for 640 by 480 video to just view online. Because if you go to the instructional designer's website, you'll see that there's video from all previous roundtable discussions. Now the video is nice and pretty good size, 640 by 480, so you can see everything. And you'll note that underneath whoever's talking at the very beginning, I put in text saying, okay, this is the person that's talking, and then the text goes away. But that text was designed for 640 by 480. Now that window right there is 320 by 240. That's half of the size. So the text is much harder to read. So those are things that you need to consider when you're creating content. I know it's very easy to think, well, I just made all these videos for this, now I'll repurpose it for this. Well, a lot of it will work. Why? Because that screen is crystal clear. All the devices coming out now are very impressive in the clarity of what they have. So you will be able to repurpose a lot of it. Right now, the chemistry department is looking into possibly doing podcasts, and they had some professional video work done by ECC where they're just repurposing DVD content. They made some lab work, chemistry stuff. It got videotaped by ECC, and now they're repurposing for possible use as a podcast. And it looks really good, crystal clear. Why? Because it was professionally done to begin with, and now it's being put on a high-resolution screen. But there's things to consider, like, are you going to put all of your, the text, handwritten stuff, or stuff that's on the board? That might not go over well because it's going to be difficult to read. Different things to consider. Yes.
Is the general rule, or is it fire?
Yes and no. That's a very good question in dealing with copyright. There's lots of different issues to consider. Of course, the broad answer was you need to check with the university lawyer, right? But there's lots of different issues, such as, well, what is the license to begin with on the content? Is it open source? Is it fair use? There's all these different issues, and that's where we get back to your content. Where is your content? Is it behind a password-protected learning management system, or is it just open, freely available? Because that opens you up to lots of liability. If a student takes your content, because they are downloading it, it is going to be on a mobile device, so they are going to have it. But if they take it after they download it from the password-protected site and then they distribute it, well, now it's no longer necessarily your fault because it was behind a password-protected site. You did have all the security mechanisms there. They were informed that you can't just distribute it. This is for this course. So that's why we're really looking into this password-protected area, the security of it, and not just telling instructors, well, just put whatever you want to on there and we'll just link up the RSS feed. So those are key issues to think about. Yeah, it does get complicated, but there is no simple answer. If you go and search about fair use, well, it gets convoluted to begin with. Are you an instructor for higher education, or are you just an instructor that's doing this for free to the general public? There's lots of different issues for it. So I can't give you a very direct answer on that. All right, so be sure to check that out when you're looking at that. There's lots of different things on there, too. If you want to go back, there's a podcast on there as well. These are just videos that were downloaded that were set up for iPod.
How did you get this converted? Did you have to go to the media center, special stuff?
No, not necessarily. I'm an electronic media coordinator, so I have special stuff to do everything. But what you do is you just have a video. Let's say you made the video and it's pretty good quality to begin with. You have to remember, start off with not good video and you try and compress it again and put it on a smaller screen. It's not going to be great. You need to start off with good stuff to have good stuff. You want to try and keep it as high quality all the time. There's various different softwares out there. There's some software that costs a pricey amount. There's other software, depending on what you want to do, there's other software out there that's completely free. If you want to do video, if you want to do audio, there's very different things. There's free software that comes with Mac if you're using a Mac GarageBand. There's free software for the PC if you want to do audio, Audacity. And then it's just a conversion process. For the MP3, for audio, that's real simple. But if you want to do video, there's several different things to consider as well. Again, I don't want this thing to revert into a how-to, but you can do lots of things with just free software that's out there.
So, as a typical example, I'm a instructor, so I videotape labs. And if you can videotape, well, now we're going for a download.
It's a download, yes.
MP3 file.
MP3 file for audio. It's going to be a different file format for video. You can upload it into K-State Online, and it won't be huge because it's going to be much smaller. It's actually going to be compressed a lot more. So there won't be a problem as far as that's concerned. Okay, so let's move on and talk about some real-world examples. So here, what I went through is I did different research on, well, what's out there as far as some real stuff that I can show you. Of course, there's big-time universities, Duke, Stanford. There's lots of universities that have done podcasting and written up about it, and so it's been out there talking about it. But I wanted to see some smaller universities, what's out there in general, to get it more of a broad spectrum. So here are some different examples, and lots of these examples are on the handout as well for you to go and check out if you're interested in more information. So let's look at, this is an example of just a full lecture that somebody did, just to give you an example. This is what's called an advanced podcast. He's got mainly just audio, but he'll throw in some pictures, right? He'll throw in this is either a PowerPoint or just basic pictures. It's real simple to do, and it becomes real small because it's not continuous video, it's just audio with some pictures.
Agricultural environment. How many of you feel pretty comfortable around farms and dealing with those? A few of you do, great. I don't know that you realize this, but every state has a pretty significant...
So one of the things to note here, it's a little difficult to read, part of that's the projector, but I'm viewing this on my computer. This is the actual podcast that he sent out. So you'd be able to hear this on an iPod or another mobile device without any problem. You'd actually be able to read this because that screen is crystal clear. And me as a guy, let's say I don't have a mobile device, I just have my laptop. Well, I'm still listening to it, I'm still viewing it, I'm still getting the content. So it's not that you're doing a podcast just for podcast's sake, just for the people with iPods or mobile devices. No, this is just another tool for you to use to send out your information, to make it easier for your students. Just different things to consider. So this is an example of an advanced podcast that someone is using as lecture content, right? So the guest lecture one, that's just an MP3, it's an audio file. It's basically just somebody that came, it was a friend of somebody, and he's like president of some other company. He comes in and he gives this presentation. Well, now the instructor is thinking, you know what? He's not going to be able to come next semester, but this is great stuff, and I want to have my students next time listen to it as well. So I'm going to capture it as an MP3 and distribute it as part of the podcast, as part of the course. Simple things you can use, simple things to enhance your course overall. So here's an example of student presentation. Now this is an instructor talking about what their students have done. But again, it's all the formats of the examples that I show you are actual podcast format. Yes.
I'm Douglas O'Grady, and I teach music technology, and we've implemented the iPods in our class in a way in which students get to prepare materials to put on the iPod for the other students to study and prepare for listening quizzes. So I prepare a playlist of pieces that are used in the class that show the history of electronic music and how it's progressed. And students research the composers and they research the pieces. They put their notes together and they put them on our class computer, and all those other students in the class hook their iPods up and download everyone else's research and study that and then take a quiz on it later. So that's one way.
Okay, so you get the understanding of what they're doing there. They're using students and their content, and they're putting it and then having everybody else look at it. So that's another key area to think about, and we'll address that more. So keep that in your mind as far as student information. Tours and fieldwork, let's try another video. This is an interesting one as well. Let's see how this works.
The iPod is a information support tool for the Nelnet Servant Leader program. What happened was back in the summer, several incoming freshmen applied for this particular project in class, and we selected 25, gave them iPods, and have been giving them instruction and support since. Their goal is to assist middle grade students at a local school who are at risk to not go to college. That is, they have the ability, but for whatever reason they may not be able to go to college, and our students from Georgia College are going to mentor them to help them to make sure that they take the right courses, that they have the information that they need in order to apply for grants and other things, scholarships to get into college. And what we're using the iPod for is to provide a podcast of information about the course and information that they might use as they mentor, and also text information so that when they're out in the field working with a student, if they need to look something up, they have it right here on as a ready reference. As the program progresses...
Okay, so one of the reasons I'm showing you these different examples is so that you can get an understanding that it's much more than, well, I'll just put my lecture audio up there for it to be downloaded as part of a podcast. There's so much more that you can do with it. It's just there's so many different possibilities. You're only limited to your imagination and by getting examples from what other people have done. Now, a key thing is also that's really being used a lot is dealing with language and different things that you can do with language lessons. Why? Because you get to actually hear from an actual native speaker.
Muy bien. Hoy vamos a conversar de los números. En nuestra vida siempre usamos números. Mi número favorito es el 1. A María le encanta el 2. A Carlos le gusta el 3. 1, el 2 y el 3. Muy bien. A ella le gusta el número 4. ¿Y a ti qué número te gusta? Me gusta el número 5.
So there's an example of that, and you could see how you could take that and go even further, right? As far as, well, they get all the stuff in class, but now they got it with them. They can go over it. This is exactly how it's supposed to sound like. You could take it further and having a real situation where you videotape, here's a person actually interacting with somebody normal. It's not just some guy trying to be as animated as possible talking about numbers. It's somebody talking to somebody else and talking about their business, and there's numbers that come up. So now you can hear it, how it's actually used fluently within sentences in an actual world situation. So many different possibilities that you could actually utilize it for to make the class more exciting or just to make it more realistic. There's one more example I'd like to show you.
I'm Deborah Vess, and I'm teaching a course called People Who Changed the World. This course addresses a lot of significant historical figures from around the globe. It is a cross-cultural course that focuses on the art of biography. And I've always wanted to make use of film in the course, but the problem is you're limited in terms of course time. First of all, our sessions only meet for an hour and a quarter at a time, and most of the films that I'd like to use are 2.5 hours or more. And there's so many masterpieces of world film that are available that really allow a student to see differences in historiographical interpretations that I've always wanted to do it. So this semester we're using the new video iPod, and my students are watching sometimes as many as 3 different films on a particular figure. For example, we just finished a unit on the first emperor of China, Shi Huangdi, and we used 3 films, and some of these films are real masterpieces of world cinema, so we're not only helping students to see really radical differences of interpretation, some of them very modern commentaries, but films from around the world that they might not ordinarily see. These were Chinese films that they watched, and very interesting to the students because the Chinese are really rethinking their interpretation of Shi Huangdi. I find that the students really are reacting very positively to this because for them, reading is something that they do in all their classes, and of course they're doing in this course as well. They have a number of monographs that they have to read.
Okay, so what do you see there? Of course, there's all sorts of copyright issues there for you, right? But you can see how she's utilizing it as supplementary material. There's all sorts of more stuff that you could do. Audio, tons of audio that you could have for a class, video. Well, here's how other people have interpreted this. Many different possibilities. We'll address that some more later as well. Some other examples, I didn't give you a video for everything because I thought it might take too much time, but some other ways as far as people have been using it are just actual interviews. You know, here's an on-the-spot real interview in our area. You know, genealogy. We're talking to somebody in the field that's actually doing stuff. You know, actual real-world situations. Quizzes and tests. Again, going in with the language situation, you could post it. It's just a simple quiz, simple language type of things for anything where you just ask them questions. Here's 3 possible answers. What do you think is right? Now again, we're not talking about some sort of dynamic thing where they actually input stuff. We're just talking about stuff to help spur their thoughts on how to learn this stuff. Feedback evaluation of student work, meaning I could just send you a podcast back saying this is specifically going to you about your work, and I'll talk about it. Or I could, in general terms, here's another podcast as a review of what everybody turned in. You know, this person over there, this is exactly what I was talking about. This is what everybody should have done. This person, without naming names, this is exactly what you shouldn't have done, right? These are the problems with what this person did. Same thing with just answering a question. Here's the question for the week. You know, 2 people, you select 2 people. This is what this person said. Now, is this correct or incorrect? Well, let's evaluate it. There's so much more dynamic stuff that you could do with this outside of class instead of using up, you know, the precious time that you have with the students. Journals and diaries of learned information. One of the examples sort of alluded to that, but you could have the student keep a diary of what's going on, what they've learned, and then you could have that be turned in as, you know, just a final project, not necessarily for a grade or maybe just a participation grade, but that could give you so much more. Because you have to think, well, is this person going to tell me much more just talking than they are actually writing some stuff down? Different things to consider. Also in that feedback, it could also be for an instructor review type stuff. Whereas, well, I make all these podcasts of all my lectures. Well, now I can go back and review, whereas I didn't have that sort of that evidence of exactly what I did during my course period. Now I have that evidence. You know what? When I talked about the Pythagorean theorem, I was totally messing them up because you should actually consider these other variables to it, and then you can redo it. You know, that's the beauty of it, having podcast different episodes, is that you can take one out and replace it, especially for the next time, or just send an updated podcast. That's another thing that they did in that first example of a lecture. You can give news, you can give updates. You know, hey everybody, the last lecture I did something completely wrong. That's why I'm sending you this immediate podcast right now. That's, you know, before the next lecture, I want you guys to make sure that you understand that I gave you this wrong information about this. This is the actual stuff. We'll talk about it some more during class. You know, these things happen, not to mention just, well, I'm not going to be there for class, so here's the episode, here's the lecture. So that's what some big universities have been doing, but some of you might be thinking, well, that's for Spanish. Of course, you could use it for Spanish, that's obvious, but what about for my major? I went through and looked at every single major that we have at Kent State University, and I selected, you know, I just went through and randomly took a whole bunch from each college, and you know what? I was able to find uses of podcasts for every single major that I looked at. I never found one where there wasn't one. So for every single major, they're using it in some sort, either for course content, or just to distribute information, or as a news program, as to talk about the research that they're doing, departmental news, all sorts of things. And this is for every single major that I looked at. And the key thing to understand with this is all stuff that was publicly available. I found all of this either through iTunes or through searching for it in Google, just to search for stuff that had a .edu extension. So this is all stuff that's out there that people are just using. So there's tons and tons of more stuff that people are actually using it for, but it's password protected. So that means you couldn't actually just find it, just looking for it. So it's being used. It's really being used by all sorts of universities. University of Illinois, University of Minnesota, Berkeley, you know, Vermont, California, technical colleges, you know, all sorts of different universities, big, small. They're using it. It's out there, and it's a common thing. It's been in use for a year, 2 years, 3 years in some situations. Okay, so it's not really state of the art. It's just more people are starting to do it, so it's stuff to just consider as another tool.
How would this be different than using Integrity?
Well, one thing is, with Tegrity, you actually be able to use this because one of the new tools with Tegrity that they're starting to implement is that you could take your Tegrity stuff and turn it into a podcast. The big thing is that the big tool that is with this is that you're able to download the content and put it on a mobile device. So now it truly is learning anytime, anywhere, because I always have my mobile device with me, or I potentially could have it, as opposed to having it on a laptop where I could or I could not. It's a big thing. Now I'll have it anywhere and everywhere. So let's talk about going beyond what's going on right now as far as what instructors are doing. Some of the things to consider are, there are areas where they're starting to use the class time just for facilitation, just for discussion. All the other book learning, all the other type of lecture type stuff is being done off of class time. It's a concept that would work really well in some situations, maybe not in others. But it's just something to consider in that, well, now you actually expand your time. There's some people that are talking about, well, no, I don't want to do podcasting, or I don't want to put all my stuff online because why are they even going to show up? Well, one of the reasons that they would show up is if you take attendance. The other one is to actually understand what they've just book learned. There's a whole different genre that comes up from, really understanding the process, really discussing about how this actually interacts, the whole discussion, asking questions, answering questions, activity, hands-on type stuff. This is stuff that we can't do because they haven't learned it yet. Well, now they will have learned it outside of class, and they'll actually be applying what they've learned. That's a possibility. The creation of just-in-time learning or nano-learning content. This is the thing that we've been trying to push this, but it really hasn't happened. But this could happen even better or easier with podcasting, meaning, instructors often have lots of questions that get asked time and time again. Well, this isn't dealing with this lecture, but this comes up. Well, you could answer this question completely, thoroughly, take a whole hour if you want. It doesn't matter because you could set it up as a podcast somewhere else as content that they can download separately or have it on an RSS feed. But hey, if you have that question, there's the answer for it right there. We don't have to take class time answering it because it's right there. Or I'm taking this class, English, 101, and I don't remember how to properly do this part. I don't remember the Pythagorean theorem at all, and now I'm taking, advanced college stuff. Well, I'm not going to use up class time to teach you something that you should already know, but I am considering it. I understand that I'm going to have more problems with you later on because you're going to be struggling. So here's how I'm going to deal with it. You want some lower level math instruction? Here's a podcast for it. Everything you need to know. Here's 2 hours of my time that I'm going to give you because it's all in that podcast. Different things. It's actually going to give you more time by doing this one time as opposed to having to do it again and again.
Will the system allow you to podcast like chapter 1 through 3 and then have a test and then test them?
Yes, except, again, we're dealing with that issue of is it a podcast or is it just content for you to download? You could easily do that with content for the student to download within K-State Online, meaning, well, this isn't going to appear until this happens, sort of a conditional branching type of thing. Yeah, that can easily be done with K-State Online. Yeah. Students as teachers creating podcasts to teach others. The technology is becoming very simple and very easy because, like I said, there's lots of free programs. Students nowadays are very technical. They have so much ability, because they're being born with this stuff already. So it's not that difficult or far-fetched to require your student to make a podcast. It could be just audio or it could be video. Lots of possibilities. And the thing is, if you have this content for them to learn, we use this in the military. I'm in the military and I'm an instructor in the military. What we do is we'll teach them several different courses, stuff that's important, and then we'll say, okay, I have 10 different courses, 10 different classes that have to be taught. Each one of you is going to teach one of these classes. And that's part of their grade. If they're not a successful instructor, well, they don't pass. They have to redo it. Why do we do that? We do that in the military specifically because in order to be able to teach something, you have to learn it at a much more ingrained level, much more than me just teaching it to you. You have that added pressure. You have that, well, I need to know much more than I'm actually teaching because what if somebody asks me a question, right? You do that with the podcast. You have the student present the podcast. Okay, everybody here, download the podcast. And then you have the other students ask questions. It's very successful. It's been used by various different colleges. And like I said, the military does that specifically. One of the future things is podcasting through a cell phone. Okay? Lots of people have iPods, but what do most people already have? If not one, then two of them. Cell phone. Practically, a huge amount of the population always has their cell phone with them. So that's just a further extension of, well, iPod, cell phone. So that's definitely something coming in the future. Also, we have just different improved mobile devices with wider screens and more storage, wireless internet access, and more capabilities. One of the downfalls of the iPod is, well, you're not on the internet anymore. You know, it's just stuff that you have here. If you wanted more stuff, or if you wanted the latest podcast, you have to sync up. You know, a future development could be where it's all built in. I want the newest podcast that my instructor has created. I just get on the internet and download it. Now I have it. You know, now I can go somewhere where there is an internet connection, but I got it already because I downloaded it on my way there. Different things, different possibilities. Nano is just small. There's different terms for this just-in-time learning.
Is it compression files then?
Well, it's not compression files. It's that instead of me teaching you this entire course, I'll just teach you a small part of it just in time for you to actually be able to complete this course that you're in. And what it deals with, it's more of a theory of you can leave the course and learn the content and then come back into the course without even actually bothering the instructor. Here's the thing about all the stuff that I just said. It's basically happening already. All right? There's already systems out there there's one that's called Pod to Mod. What it does is it transforms your podcast into a mobile form so that you could actually just dial in to a certain place and then you can hear the entire podcast on your cell phone. That's already happening. That's been going on for a year at least already. Cell phones are now coming out with much bigger screens. Here's a couple of examples, and this is stuff that's going on already. This isn't just prototypes, okay? There's all sorts of new accessories that are coming for the iPod that are out already. One is the iTalk. Basically, it turns your iPod into the ability to create audio right then and there. So you could go somewhere and be creating your podcast without having your computer with you. Different things to make it easier, to make it faster. There's talk of an iPhone that might be coming out soon, and basically it would be the same thing as your iPod with the phone capability built in. So now you got two things in the same thing. Other things that are more futuristic that are definitely coming are crazy storage capabilities. We're talking about having a terabyte within your cell phone, you know, which basically means, well, you can have as much stuff as you want there. It's more than what you have on a regular computer. Foldable screens. You know, some people are still having problems, especially as more and more students are older and older and have difficulty seeing a small screen. Now there's things where the screen can come out and actually open up and be much bigger and much easier for somebody to view. All things that are coming down the pipe. That's pretty much the main portion of what I had to talk. I wanted to allow lots of time for questions in case somebody had something they wanted to address. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that you use the MP3 extensions for audio files, but there would be a different extension for video, and I'm assuming a different extension for text.
There's actually, the question that she had was dealing about extensions for different types of podcasting material, of downloading material. Yes, there are different file extensions, and that gets more into the how-to, because depending on the type of device that you're using, type of mobile device that you're using, it will allow and will play various different types. Like you could create audio as a MP3, as ACC, as MOV, and different players might not be able to play it. MP3 is a very general term. It's a very general extension that pretty much any player will be able to play. That's why I would recommend using MP3. I'd recommend, as always, to be as general as possible in the creation of your content. Instead of making the video .mov, go ahead and make it into like an MP4, M4A. It's basically just another video extension type, but it'll be able to be played on many more type of devices. Yes?
My iPod is like 2.5 years old. Does it have a video screen? If I downloaded like an MP4, would it go ahead and play the audio? Or
That's a good question. I'm thinking no. But with certain firmware updates, it might be able to. But generally, MP3, it'd be able to play that, of course. And the thing is that right now, Apple has huge market share. Depending on what type, or if you're talking about video iPod or just an audio iPod, they have anywhere between 50% of the market share to 70, 80% of the market share. I personally believe that that's not going to last for very much longer. This Christmas is supposed to be the Christmas for all sorts of devices to come out. Microsoft just came out with their new iPod killer. It's called the Zune. Basically, it can do everything that the iPod can do, but it's got a bigger screen. and it's got internet access. Remember how I was telling you about the futures now? It's happening. And there's many more devices coming out that are just like that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Without an iPod, disadvantage for this technology, right? They can do it on their own computer.
Right, and that's a key thing. And one of the things that I'm trying to push is to not always say the word iPod. I know it's easier for everybody because, oh yeah, iPod, that's the cool little white thing with the white earplugs, right? But there's so many other devices out there. You know, I did a unscientific study where I went around the office and I asked all of our younger student workers, do you have an MP3 player? And if so, is it an iPod? The majority of the people, yes, for sure they had an MP3 player, but not everybody had the iPod. It was something like 40%. So there's still, 60% of people still had an MP3 player, but it wasn't an iPod. So they could still benefit from this. And even if they didn't have it, well, they can still play it on a computer, on a laptop, on a regular computer. They could still access it in the library. So it definitely doesn't need to be set up to just eliminate those people who don't have mobile devices or require them to get it, especially once it becomes integrated with cell phones. Yes, sir.
I assume usage is highest among the younger audiences. What's the trend or the opportunities in the future for, say, the baby boomers and maybe even older?
Right. From what I've read is that there are lots of older users that are getting the podcast and are using it just on their laptops, because most older people like me, I have the iPod, but I always have my laptop with me personally because I do lots of video type stuff, and I generally listen to things on my laptop. So that you're not losing it by that. But more and more people are getting those devices because the trend is that, well, the devices are becoming so that it's not just for this. It's not just to view video. It's not just to do this. It's also to play games on. It's also to, integrate it with a PDA type system. One of the future technologies that's actually coming out already is where it projects a keyboard, so it uses light sensitivity so I can actually type on there, but I still have my small portable device. So the early adopters to a lot of some of this advanced capabilities are the older people.
I might just like to add that the other thing is the trend is moving towards using one robot kind of.
Right. There was an article in the newspaper talked about it.
Recently, that they're trying to move towards one little equipment where they can do everything from that email, send out, watch a video, do a podcast, listen to something, listen to their music. They're trying to move towards one thing rather than having 3-4 things to do separately. So that's the trend.
You had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. The advantage of podcasts is that on a day-to-day basis or a weekly basis, they'll automatically download that material. Whereas compared to just putting media on the internet, the only disadvantage then is that automatically do that to your clients, correct?
Right. When you're talking about podcasting per se, podcasting is talking specifically about making it so that it's automatically downloaded.
Right.
Now, sort of another side issue with that is by creating content that could be podcast, even if you don't create the actual RSS feed, it's still content that could be played on a mobile player.
Sure.
So then that's the other benefit of, well, I could just put media online, but I could design it so that it's only playable on your laptop because it's, the proportions, the extensions for it, those are all different things to consider. So yeah, what you're saying.
Specifically, we're talking about podcasting, we're talking about that RSS feed.
Right.
Allows people to automatically download it.
Right, and the whole reason for that is so that, I don't always check it every time. It's just automatic. I sync it up, and then you can set it up in different ways to tell it to automatically download everything that needs to be downloaded, or set it so that you can check it, and then verify, yes, download this, download that. Now you kind of, that added capability you kind of already have with K-State Online or Learning Management System because they're going to be checking it anyways, right? They're going to be going there for, well, what's the latest assignment? What are we doing differently? I need to go into the message board. So they're already going to be exposed to it and see, or the instructor will tell them, hey, you need to download this new episode.
But just a hypothetical, if it's an organization at K-State that wants to make media basically available to non-K-State people, we'd have to do that outside of K-State Online, right?
Right, because anything on K-State Online is going to be password protected for security. Yeah, so yeah, let me go. Yes? Yeah.
How can you, it sounds like a lot of the podcasting content might have temporary value versus permanent value. And I'm wondering how you can increase the shelf life and quality of the content you put into a podcast.
That's a good question. part of it is that it isn't a temporary shelf life, because if you have a guest lecture, that's going to be something valuable that you want to show again and again. But you could mess it up when you put in things within that same podcast or that same video or episode by saying things like, okay, everybody, before the guest lecturer talks, I just want to remind everybody that you need to turn in your assignment by Tuesday. Well, you just sort of messed everything up, and is that going to be the same for the next semester? No, it's not. You know, if you need to make 2 different podcasts, it's very simple, it's very easy. So yeah, those are different things to consider when you're actually making the content. Yes?
How big is a typical file, say, for a 50-minute lecture? How big a file is it?
That's a good question. Let me see if I can. Long one. This one was an hour and a half, and it's 44 megabytes. That was a video, yes. Yeah. And that was with lots of motion, lots of talking, lots of different colors. That all affects the file size.
How much was it?
44 megabytes. Like the one that I sent around. Yeah, 44 megabytes, 44,000 kilobytes. Now the iPod that I just sent around, that's an older one. It's about 2 years old, and it has 30 gigs with the space in there. So you can see there's lots of room for that. And as I said, that's going up, only up. There's talk already about terabyte capabilities and all sorts of futuristic sci-fi stuff. Yes?
Have you got any feedback or any research been done on the type of format and learning based on that format? In other words, I mean, I tried doing video tapes, and then I tried uploading integrity, and then I've used PowerPoint for voice overlaid, PowerPoint without. And I haven't found a whole lot of useful feedback in my just courses that I've done of the actual talking versus non. Is there any research that backs that up?
There's various different things, and it's mainly thinking about different possibilities and situations, because, you know, in some situations they'd say, well, I don't need the stinking talking head because I got your PowerPoint presentation right here. Just maximize that so I can view that even better. Then you have other situations where, no, I really want that talking head because English isn't my second language, you know, or English isn't my first language, it's my second language. So by seeing you talk, that assists me very much. And then you have the whole accessibility issue. If I can see a talking head, I might be able to read that person's lips. All sorts of different situations for that specifically. And as far as more in detailed research, I haven't. But yeah, there's different situations, different possibilities to consider. Anybody else? Another question? No? Yes?
Are you planning to offer a section on how to?
On how to? If you look into your handout, I put in several different resources for you. One is, I think that the Apple seminar is going to be more of a how-to. I'm not sure, but I believe that's what they're going to be doing. There's also, Ernie Perez did somewhat of a how-to dealing with audio presentations and podcasts. I also did do an actual podcast on how to podcast. So if you download the content or you subscribe to it, you'll get 3 different videos that talk about the process of making a video podcast using nothing but free tools. So there's a how-to right there for you. And there's also a how to make a podcast. It's just a website that talks about it, and it's got some good information for you there. The first reference there, podcasting and vodcasting, definitions, discussions, and implications. It's a really good article. It's a full article in PDF format for you to read, and it talks about everything dealing with podcasting, some of the future issues. But again, some of the future issues have already surpassed it. This is a 2005 article, but it addresses that a little bit. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your time.
The Landon Lecture Series.
Chemicals are developed.
I would like to take a moment to congratulate all of you who are graduating today with virtual commencement.
Kansas State University's Office of Mediated Education.